When the Russian tanks rolled into Georgia in 2008, China was one of the few states that backed their action. Both sides should show restraint, urged Beijing, as Moscow destroyed the Georgian army in a matter of days. Today, there is talk of war in Ukraine, and once again, China finds itself on the same side as Russia. The two powers have tried to block UN resolutions condemning Moscow's invasion of Crimea and its support for pro-Russian separatists in the east. The difference is that this time, Beijing has been less vocal than usual. That may be because it has problems of its own, with restive minorities on its western borders, Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, and Tibetans around Lhasa. But there are other reasons why China might think twice before backing Russia too openly. One is that Ukraine is a major supplier of military technology to China, especially for naval vessels and aircraft engines. Another is that it has deeper ties with Kyiv than you might expect. It was only in February that President Xi Jinping made his first state visit to Russia, which lasted all 3 days. He had already visited Ukraine 3 times since coming to power 18 months earlier and signed deals worth millions. China and Russia are neighbors, but China has been looking to Ukraine for military technology. As a result, the Ukrainian arms industry has become one of the world's top exporters of weapons. In September 2011, the Chinese government signed a contract worth $3 billion with Ukraine's state-owned defense firm Ukrespekport to purchase a dozen AN-225 Mriya transport aircraft. The deal also includes an option for 9 more aircraft, according to Jane's Defense Weekly. The AN-225 Mriya is a unique aircraft with a lifting capacity of 250 tons. It is the largest plane in the world and was originally designed to carry the Soviet space shuttle Buran on its back. The only other AN-225 in existence is owned by Antonov Airlines, the cargo division of Antonov Design Bureau, or ADB, which designed the plane. With the contract signed in September 2011, China became the first foreign customer for this plane. Antonov had already delivered 2 AN-178 transport aircraft to China under a bilateral agreement between Ukraine and China that was signed in 2009. When this new contract is fulfilled, China will own most of the world's fleet of heavy transport aircraft based on Antonov designs. The Ukrainian-made propeller that powers the new Chinese attack helicopter is a sign of how close China and Russia have become in the past 2 decades. The helicopters are made in Russia, but the propellers come from Kyiv because the Russian ones failed. China has also turned to Ukraine for help in developing other aircraft, including a 4-engine jet airliner that is the largest passenger plane it has ever built, and for power generation turbines, oil pipelines, and farm equipment. China is importing $1 billion worth of Ukrainian weaponry this year, a 40-fold increase since 1992, including helicopters and missiles. China's economic relationship with Ukraine is not as big as with other former Soviet republics like Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. But China has outpaced Europe and the United States in building trade ties with Ukraine, one of the most strategically important countries of the former Soviet Union. For all its size and growing military might, China still lacks high technology that can compete in world markets. Ukraine offered some of what China needs because it inherited much of the Soviet Union's aviation industry. Moreover, Chinese military officers and experts on international relations have long viewed Ukraine as a potential supplier of cutting-edge weapons technology, said Russell Shao, executive director of the Global Taiwan Institute in Washington. Ukraine has been a special focus for China's military procurement from the very beginning, Mr. Shao said. In the late 80s and early 90s, a lot of Chinese delegations went to Ukraine. The Chinese government saw weapons technology as an essential stepping stone to its goal of becoming a global power. It was determined to acquire advanced weaponry and reverse engineer it so that it could mass produce its versions. And it found Ukraine an attractive source because the nation had one of the most advanced military industries in Russia's former sphere and was eager to sell its wares abroad because it desperately needed money. China began building ties with Ukraine's defense industry after the Soviet collapse in 1991. The first contract came 2 years later when China agreed to buy 8 diesel submarines for $600 million. Since then, China has bought 24 Su-27 fighter jets for $500 million, 2 AN-12B transport planes for $100 million, and 6 Kilo-class diesel submarines for $1 billion. The most recent Chinese military weaponry has come from Ukraine, not Russia. China's J-15 fighter jet is based on the Ukrainian Sukhoi Su-33, a version of which also served as the basis for the J-11B fighter that China built with Russian help. In a recent article in the journal Modern War, 2 military analysts, Andrew Erickson and Austin Strange, contend that while many observers have argued that Russia is the country most affected by China's military modernization, Ukraine is more vulnerable. Ukrainian defense enterprises are heavily dependent on exports to China, they argue. Beijing has been a major buyer of both aircraft and ship engines. The Ukrainian arms industry was closely linked to China through its Soviet predecessor, but after 1991, trade with Moscow declined sharply, as Moscow favored Russian producers. Kyiv turned to Beijing instead, but there were limits to what it could sell directly because of its membership in the Missile Technology Control Regime, an agreement among 34 nations intended to limit the proliferation of ballistic missiles and other weapons. So, Ukraine sold designs and components to China for assembly there. Historically, cooperation in military technology has been the most sensitive area of China-Russia defense ties, and progress in this area has been very limited. Moscow's concerns over technology proliferation in China have long been a major obstacle to Sino-Russian cooperation. Although Russia stands to gain substantially from expanded cooperation with China, it has consistently placed strict limits on the transfer of capabilities that it considers militarily critical. China's overtures in the military sphere towards post-Soviet Ukraine were meant to serve as a signal to Russia. Ukraine was interested in using Chinese purchases of military hardware as leverage for broader political concessions from Beijing. But Beijing is unlikely to meet Ukraine's expectations, given its weariness from being drawn into local conflicts and its low regard for Ukraine's technical expertise. China's efforts to obtain Russian military technology were thwarted by Moscow's refusal to sell advanced weapons systems, and its unwillingness to disclose the level of detail necessary for Chinese firms to produce licensed copies of Russian equipment. In addition, Moscow demonstrated increasing reluctance to provide maintenance and spare parts for Soviet-era equipment already purchased by China. These problems have prompted Beijing to consider alternatives, such as Eastern European arms traders or even the black market. But there are limits on how far it can go if it wants to avoid jeopardizing its relations. While China and Russia are often portrayed as close allies, China's decision to look to Ukraine for advanced military hardware shows that Beijing is not afraid to go against Moscow's interests. In the military realm, in particular, the relationship with Ukraine is a little bit fraught, said Richard Bitzinger, an analyst at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Beijing wants Ukrainian weapons systems, and there are a lot of reports of Chinese taking things apart, reverse engineering, and then copying them. China and Russia have been getting closer recently as their economies have become more intertwined. But analysts say China has long been a tricky partner for Russia in matters of defense. China is a close ally of Russia and has often spoken out in support of Moscow's interests at the United Nations, especially in recent times and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The apparent sale, which has not been confirmed by either country, comes amid a period of close cooperation between the former Soviet allies. China has been a close ally of Russia and has often spoken out in support of Moscow's interests at the United Nations, especially in recent times over sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. The Chinese leader told Mr. Putin that China, holds a clear and consistent position on international affairs, including the situation in Ukraine and Syria. Mr. Xi said this position would not change. Mr. Xi also praised what he called the high level of relations between Russia and China and their strategic coordination. The two nations have held joint military exercises in recent years as they try to improve ties. China is Russia's biggest trading partner, while Russia plays an important role in supplying China with energy resources. The two countries have a long-standing strategic partnership, with billions of dollars being pumped into joint ventures in areas of energy, technology, and defense. Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine has drawn criticism from the West. Both nations are members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a security bloc founded by China and Russia. The group also includes 4 Central Asian states: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. At the time, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said in an official statement that we respect the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine, but added that Beijing remained neutral over Crimea's future. In May, China again abstained when another UN resolution was passed condemning Russia's actions in Ukraine. China is also expected to block any attempt by the US and European allies to seek UN Security Council sanctions against Russia over its involvement in Ukraine. Please remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.